May 20th, 2026. 8 men walked into a cave in the mountains of central Laos. They weren't explorers or tourists. They went in looking for gold, and they went in deep. Then it rained. What followed over the next 10 days pulled in dive teams from across the region and pushed some of the most experienced cave rescuers alive to the edge of what they could survive. It became one of the hardest underground rescues in years. And as of right now, it still isn't finished. Viewer discretion is advised. The cave sits in Xaisambun, a remote mountainous province in central Laos. The hills here are limestone, soft and full of holes, and the rock is riddled with caves. Some of them are mapped. This one wasn't. It wasn't a tourist site or a dive location. It was a rough opening in the hillside that local people knew about. The sort of place you go into only when you've got a reason to. And it wasn't a simple tunnel. From the entrance, the route ran inward and down through a series of chambers, each one linked to the next by tight, awkward passages. Early on, it pitched into a 45-degree slope that had to be crawled down. In places, the gap shrank to about 60 centimeters, barely 2 feet, narrow enough to force a grown man sideways or onto his hands and knees. Between the chambers came sheer drops, one of 4 to 5 meters and another of around 2 with broken rock the whole way, even dry, even well lit. It was slow and punishing ground. The chambers ran deep. The fourth one sat more than 260 meters from the entrance, over 850 feet inside the hill. That's a long way to be from daylight. The men went in the way anyone would, through the mouth of the cave into the first chamber, then deeper, squeezing through the tight sections and climbing down the drops, working from chamber to chamber toward the deposits they'd come to find. None of them were miners by trade. One, Carla, was a former soldier, and this was already the 4th time he'd gone looking for gold. By the time they stopped, they were well inside the system, hundreds of meters underground. Behind them, the passages they'd crawled through were the only way back out, and every meter of that route ran along the lowest ground in the cave. A storm broke over the hills above the cave, and it kept coming. In limestone country, rain doesn't enter through the cave mouth. It works down through cracks in the rock, runs along hidden channels, and pools in the lowest part of the system first. The lowest part was the way out. Water climbed into the narrow passages behind the men, filling the choke points, swallowing the crawl spaces they'd come through on the way in. It never had to flood the whole cave. Filling one low section between them and the entrance was enough, and that section happened to be the tightest, most awkward part of the entire route. One of the 8 got across in time. He forced his way through the rising water before it closed completely, fought back through the flooding passages, and reached the surface. He raised the alarm. 7 men were still inside. Without him, no one above ground would have known there was anyone left to save. The men weren't lost. They hadn't wandered down the wrong passage. The exit sat exactly where they left it, and the way home was the same route they'd walked in on. It was simply underwater. Now that's the whole trap. The way out doesn't disappear. It fills with water, and the moment it does, distance stops mattering. A man sitting 260 meters from daylight is as cut off as 1-2 kilometers down, because the thing between him and fresh air is a flooded pitch-black tunnel packed with silt. Crossing it takes diving gear, training, and the nerve to stay still in the dark when you can't see your own hands. The villagers had none of that. The door was right there. They just had no way to open it. As the water rose, 5 of the men did the one thing that kept them alive. They climbed. Kamla, Mued, Ing, and Lian pulled back to the 4th chamber, the high ground more than 260 meters in, and found a pocket of air the flood hadn't reached. A cave like this fills from the bottom up. So those few meters of height were the only reason they were still breathing. They'd found the right rock to stand on. That bought them survival, not safety. They were soaked through, cold, and sitting in absolute darkness with almost nothing to eat. The damp went to work on them over the days that followed. Their skin started to break down. Their hands and feet swelled from being wet for so long, and their stomachs turned. None of it dramatic, just a slow bleed of strength hour after hour, draining the reserves they were going to need to get out. They had air, and they had each other. A way out was the one thing they didn't have. But outside, the operation grew fast. Local Lao rescue teams were joined by specialists from several countries, including Thai cave divers who had worked the 2018 Tam Luang rescue, the mission that brought a youth football team out of a flooded cave in Thailand. One of them was Mikko Pari, a veteran Finnish technical diver and underwater explorer, who had been part of that operation too. All that experience counted for a lot. It also meant these were people who knew in detail how badly a cave like this could go. This one made them earn every meter. On May 25th, the multinational team officially began the push into the cave's narrow flooded passages, working inward one chamber at a time toward the missing men. They came loaded with specialized gear, oxygen tanks, and full face masks for men who had never worn either. Headlamps and ropes with guidelines strung through every flooded section so a diver could find the way out blind. A Wi-Fi link run into the cave to keep the teams in contact through the rock. Cave stretchers in case a survivor was too weak to move himself. And pumps fed by a generator at the entrance running without a break to pull the water level down. What they went down into was nothing like a dive video. The water was thick brown silt, churning with visibility down to almost zero. The Australian on the team, Josh Richards, summed it up as diving in coffee. A torch didn't cut through it. It just glowed in the murk a few inches in front of a diver's lamp. With sight gone, the divers worked by touch, by guideline, and by the feel of the walls closing in on both shoulders. Pari pushed through a couple of 100 meters of near-constant restriction. Sectioned so tight there was no room to turn. One ran about 25 meters with nowhere to turn around. Commit to it, and you were committed all the way. Other gaps were so tight the divers had to strip off their gear and push it through ahead of them just to fit. The walls were soft, crumbling clay with sharp rock and sudden drops the length of the route. The air was a problem too. Toxic gas built up in the chambers, and rescuers had to pump fresh air in just to keep them breathable. And the whole time, the men had a clock of their own running down. Every hour the divers spent feeling through silt and forcing through the gaps was another hour the 5 spent soaked and freezing in the dark. The water was cold. They had no way to get dry, and after days of it, hypothermia was becoming as real a threat as the flood that had trapped them. The rescuers weren't only fighting the cave, they were racing it. 2 days later, on May 27th, they reached the 4th chamber. A Thai specialist named Norris Pallasing was among the divers whose lights found them. 5 men, alive, weak and filthy, and stunned to see another human being, Pallasing told them help had arrived and handed over water and energy gel. They hadn't eaten in days, but finding them alive was the easy part. Getting them out was the problem. None of the 5 were divers, and the only road home led straight back through the flooded passages that had nearly beaten trained specialists. So the rescuers fed them, warmed them, and started the slow, patient work of getting them ready. How to breathe through a mask, how to hold steady with water over their heads and nothing to see, how to put their lives in a stranger's hands in the dark. On May 29th, they brought out the first man, Mued. A diver guided him through the flooded sections, the 2 of them threading the narrow, blacked-out passages side by side. The whole thing took around 30 minutes. When he came up at the entrance, he couldn't stand on his own. But he was out. 1 down, 4 still in the chamber, and 2 still missing somewhere deeper. That night, the pumps kept running. The plan for the morning was grim but simple. Go back in and bring the other 4 out the hard way, 1 at a time, through the flooded route. The divers were already pulling on their wetsuits. Then the 4 men walked up to the cave entrance on their own. The pumps had done their job overnight. The water had dropped. The route had opened just enough, and the 4 had come out through it themselves, walking and winging alongside the divers who'd gone in to bring them food and water. Josh Richards said he was still getting into his wetsuit when they emerged under their own power. They came out soaked and spent, hardly able to stand. Rescuers wrapped them in foil blankets and carried them off on stretchers. Families who had waited more than a week watched them come back alive. 5 of the 7 were out. As the rescuers weighed whether to go deeper for the 2 missing men, the forecast turned on them again. So the pumps keep going. They run through the night at the cave mouth, holding the water down, buying time the rescuers might not even get to use. Somewhere past the 4th chamber in the flooded dark, 2 men still haven't been found, and the rain is on its way back. Josh, muddy and shaking, held upright by the rescuers waiting for him. The cave wasn't done with them, though. 2 men were still missing. They're thought to have gone into the system separately from the other 5, and to have pushed further in, deeper and lower than the 4th chamber, into a section the search hadn't yet reached. In a flooded cave, low is the worst place to be. Water fills the low ground first and drains it last. Those deeper sections were still completely underwater, in worse shape than anything the divers had crossed to reach the 5. Searching them meant sending people into the most dangerous part of an already deadly cave, and the weather was about to make that call for them. More rain is moving in over the mountains, the same weather that started all of this. If a new storm floods the cave again, those passages could close completely, and the divers may not get back in at all. The window that let 4 men walk out could shut again, this time with 2 of the group still on the wrong side of it. With the flooded route increasingly unreliable, attention shifted to the hilltop directly above the cave, where rescuers found a vertical shaft dropping more than 80 meters straight down into the rock. They rappelled into it, hoping it would punch through to the unexplored chamber where the 2 men might be. It didn't. The shaft was choked with rockfall and debris with no way through. 2 men are still inside. The pumps are still running. And as of now, no one is entirely sure what the next move is. This is a developing story.